Hello and welcome to an Intellectual Property Society interview. My name is Patrick Reilly. I'm the proud founder of the Intellectual Property Society. Our guest today is Margaret Rosas, and the topic is co-working and the community of Santa Cruz, California. How are you today, Margaret?
I'm great, Pat. Thanks. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Margaret, what is co-working to you?
Co-working is a movement. It's a movement to basically create a different kind of environment for working. Basically looking at creating spaces where people are able to come and collaborate in these spaces. So co-working is a movement for a different type of working environment, and it basically convenes around spaces.
Do you think creative workers especially benefit from co-working environments?
Absolutely. The creative worker needs a lot of inputs, and co-working environments provide that kind of space where you never know what the collection of people is going to be. You're not really looking at the same collection and configuration of people every day, and so what could be water cooler talk one day with a designer and engineer one day, and then the next day you're talking to a marketing person and an IP lawyer. So.
Could you tell me a little bit about your general impression of the history of co-working, how it got started, how it gained momentum as a movement?
So I can kind of speak from my experience of co-working. It was the summer of 2007, and I was here in Santa Cruz, and we were working in an office park just outside of downtown called the Sash Mill. And I thought that was the coolest place to have an office in Santa Cruz, because they had these cool, modern-looking silver buildings. And ultimately what happened is we felt like we were rattling around in this empty cage up there. So we were a company of about 7 employees at the time, and basically looking for connection in the technology arena and field. And that was kind of the height. Web 2.0, it was being named at this point, and it had already been named, but this was the moment of Web 2.0 arriving, certainly in my purview. And so at that point we were feeling like we were really excited to work with each other. So we had a designer and software programmers and operations and an administrative assistant. And so we had our own team dynamic, was really awesome. And we would go to events over the hill. And one event in particular, I remember the 2 guys that went came back and they're like, yeah, we were at this event at Google, and they're like, where are you from? And it was like, Santa Cruz. And it was like, there's no tech in Santa Cruz. And it was like, what do you mean there's no tech in Santa Cruz? We're in Santa Cruz and we're really awesome. But we really were isolated. And so at that time, my brother, William Lawrence, was working for me, and he had a friend, David Beach, who worked at Yahoo. And so Beach worked over the hill at Yahoo, and he and William were friends through the social networks. And they basically came in, they were, I think, in large ways, my introduction to the co-working space, and my brother in particular. He was very familiar with Chris Messina and Tara Hunt of Citizen Space in San Francisco. And so I knew about Citizen Space. We had a friend, Marcus Nelson, who was in Wausau, Wisconsin, and he had launched a co-working space there in the middle of Wisconsin. And so we had a lot of personal stories. So Marcus was a friend of my brother's. Beach was working at the innovation, it was called, I don't know, the Brick House, which was an innovation space for Yahoo in the city. And so the Brick House kind of had this co-working feel. It wasn't co-working at all, but it was outside of the Yahoo campus, and it was meant to be this innovation space. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about innovation spaces and cooperative spaces. And so that's where we started learning about co-working and hearing people's firsthand experience and going up to the city and seeing those places. And so William and Rob went on a tour. That fall there was a tour of co-working spaces in the city. And And they had like a bus that went to the different co-working spaces.
This is the fall of 2008?
2007.
2007.
Yeah, so it was 3 years ago.
Okay.
And so we were, so they went on the tour, and at the time, travel was limited for me. I had a 9-month-old little boy, and so I didn't go, but I was like, gave them very clear instructions, like bring back lots of information and details. So we had 1,000 square feet at the sash mill, and we were toying with the fact of like, well, maybe we could make that a co-working space. And around the same time, we met Jeremy Neuner from the city, and I met Saul Lippman and Sean Tario. And so there's new people that I started to connect with here in Santa Cruz. And so Jeremy was working for the city
Of Santa Cruz.
Of Santa Cruz. And Saul was working for a startup over the hill. Sean Tario was working for kind of a startup, kind of a bigger company, but an internet service provider over the hill, but was very interested in cultivating a tech scene here in Santa Cruz. So through those connections, we decided that we needed to convene. So we decided to have a geek dinner. So there were geek dinners happening down in LA. Heather Vescent, who I had met at She's Geeky in the fall of 2007 too. So there are a series of events that happened here. So She's Geeky happened. I met Heather Vescent there. She was doing geek dinners in LA. Sean Tario also met her. And so through that connection, we learned about what geek dinners were like and what was happening. We're like, we should have a geek dinner here. So we put a stake in the ground and we said, let's have a geek dinner. So I believe it was November 29th or something of that year. And we had our first geek dinner at the Center Street Grill. And about 40 plus people who were all living in Santa Cruz. And it was pretty amazing. We were pretty stoked. And it was a very high energy meeting. We got a lot of people met for the first time. A lot of people basically began to understand that there was a lot of people here. They were just hiding. And so it's like there wasn't a place to convene. So the geek dinner was the first place we had to convene. And then from that, we started a bunch of other things. We very quickly went from the geek dinners into forming a group of people that were interested in creating a startup. And so that startup was started with Beach and Saul Lippman, and that was 12 Seconds. And we started having meetings with 12 Seconds in our Quiddity's office in the sash mill. And there were a number of us at Quiddity's that were participating in the startup, and then other people came in to participate in the beginning of that startup as well. So around the same time, we're still feeling this itch for co-working space. We're like, this is great to have people here, and we extended co-working invitations to people at the geek dinner that they could come to Quiddity's, and we had an empty desk. It's like, if you ever want to co-work, come on and co-work. And so that would happen. Beach would come, instead of going over the hill, he would come and he would work at the office, and Marcus was in town and he did the same thing. And so to the extent that we could open up our office, we did. And then, I don't know, timing-wise, we also started to have something called Jellies. So this was started by, his name's Amit Gupta in New York. And Jellies was a play on words, but it was basically a way to have kind of a one-day co-working day. And so you could announce it, and then people would come and show up. And so on a couple of times we opened up the doors at Quiddity's in the sash mill, and we had Jellies. And out of the Jellies came some great things. That was where Shane Perlman and I hatched up this idea of having Santa Cruz's first bar camp. So we came up with Freelance Camp and started the planning from a jelly. And then the other thing that happened was, so we were really buzzed about co-working, right? Like we were just like, this is really great to like get people from these different places and to be able to collaborate with them, so that we're not just working in our own silo. Because with technology, there's a lot of technology to be kept up to date on, you know, whether it would be web standards and web development practices, or graphic design and UI things, or mobile devices. I mean, at the time there were very few mobile devices that even did web things. It's come a long ways in 3 years. So it was really exciting to get together with people and really be able to share information and knowledge. And we were hot and heavy about this idea of co-working, not sure who was going to make it happen, but we knew that Santa Cruz really needed it to happen. At the same time, there was some movement going for an incubator in Santa Cruz. So there was a series of meetings in town about an incubator, and Saul and Sean had actually spoken. Prior to me meeting them, they had an idea, which they'd called the Hatchery, which is going to be an incubator. And there was some interest from the university and some space on the west side, and there was all this talk about creating an incubator. And so far, it's pretty much still just been talk. That really didn't happen. And in a similar, the other thing that was happening at this time, there's so many things that were happening in hindsight right now, or in this 2007 time period. So there was an organization called the Santa Cruz Design and Innovation Center that had an event January 18th of 2008. And that event was to basically to bring people out of the woodwork. So we'd had a geek dinner. This event was planned by a different group. So we had this period of momentum that was just growing. And people were coming out, and it was like, here we are, here's Santa Cruz, and we're innovators and we're creatives, and we want to collaborate and connect and be somewhere. And we saw this worldwide movement of co-working popping up in various cities around the world. And it was like, we really need co-working to happen here. Like, this is the next step.